Good morning, everybody. Happy Tuesday. So yesterday you had to read and analyze the passage about scientific research from the book about the 1918 flu epidemic. So I just wanted to be able to go over the passage with you so you can kind of check and see how you did on your annotations yesterday prior to writing today, because today you're going to write your intro paragraph and one body paragraph of analysis to sort of practice that writing process. So I want you to feel like super confident when you go into that writing. So go ahead and check over your annotations as you watch this video today. So I'll go ahead and start sharing my screen with you now so we can look at the passage if you want to open up your Google Doc from yesterday. So yesterday we had already gone over the rhetorical situation of the text together. We have an author, John M. Barry, whose purpose here is to characterize scientific research. So as we're reading the passage, we're really trying to determine what is his characterization of scientific research. What is that like? He's definitely got a broader audience here. It's a more general audience, the general public, scientists included, but he's definitely trying to get all people to really understand what science is like. And as we already discussed, it comes from a book about the 1918 flu epidemic. So we read the introduction yesterday where he talks about certainty and uncertainty and sort of compares and contrasts those two ideas. So he can really introduce this characterization of science as being able to embrace the uncertainty and how that takes a lot of courage to do, because uncertainty is really scary. So scientists have to be able to be comfortable and not scared of uncertainty, but really just okay with that. So we'll go ahead and look at the next paragraph here. He says, a scientist must accept the fact that all his or her work, even beliefs, may break apart upon the sharp edge of a single laboratory finding. And just as Einstein refused to accept his own theory until his predictions were tested, one must seek out such findings. Ultimately, a scientist has nothing to believe in but the process of inquiry. To move forcefully and aggressively, even while uncertain, requires a confidence and strength deeper than physical courage. Okay, so as I'm thinking about what he's saying, again, I'm seeing this emphasis on like how courageous scientists need to be and how it's a different type of courage than when we think about this like physical courage of going out and exploring or saving lives or those kind of typical associations with courage. So that stands out to me. And it's really courageous to think about this part. He says in the beginning of the paragraph, you have to be willing to have all your work, like you've worked so hard on trying to figure out certain things, and then all that work was for nothing because you make a new discovery that proves it all wrong. So if I just kind of sum up what he's saying in this paragraph, scientists must eagerly embrace the idea that all their hard work can be proven wrong by a new discovery. Because he says, again, they have to seek those out. So they really have to be eager about them. Which means they can never be certain about anything except the scientific process. That inquiry process, or you guys have heard it kind of like the scientific method. Okay, so again, we see his purpose here. If we think about the why, he's going so in depth with this. Continuing to characterize scientists as these courageous individuals. And some rhetorical choices you might be noticing here. Okay, obviously Einstein kind of draws your attention right away. So we've got this appeal to authority in the field of science. And then again, sort of if I kind of really think about the major rhetorical technique going on here, it's really sort of definition here of a scientist and of courage and what he means by courage and how it's really different than kind of our traditional understanding of the word. Okay. All real scientists exist on the frontier. Even the least ambitious among them deal with the unknown, if only one step beyond the known. The best among them move into a wilderness region where they know almost nothing, where the very tools and techniques needed to clear the wilderness, to bring order to it, do not exist. There, they probe in a disciplined way. There's a single step can take them through the looking glass into a world that seems entirely different. And if they are at least partly correct, their probing acts like a crystal to precipitate an order out of chaos, to create form, structure, direction. A single step can also take them off a cliff. Okay, so what's he saying here now? Again, he's really talking about, here's where we get into like kind of the interesting rhetorical choices. We have lots of metaphors and analogies, so we have to sort of pick those apart to really get to what he's saying. So he's comparing scientists to these like explorers out on the frontier in the wilderness, exploring the unknown, this sort of thing. But they don't have anything that they need to explore it. So what he's really saying is scientists have to investigate and explore with very little understanding or resources being given to them. They have to create the whole process. And their work could lead to success, or it could lead to failure or even danger. Okay, if we think about this idea, a single step can also take them off a cliff, right? So they can go totally in the wrong direction, get totally lost. So lots of different things can happen during this scientific process. Okay, so again here you might be noticing if we think about all these analogies he's making about scientific discovery and just how complex that process is and how they're trying to create order out of nothing. Again, we're really seeing here that this all connects to his overall purpose. We're not really getting a whole ton of the other letters of space here in terms of like context or exigence. He really just is trying to go into this deep dive of exploring the characterization of science and research and what this looks like. But I think what's kind of cool is now he's going deeper into the actual research process. So we kind of started out focusing mostly on the scientists themselves and the characteristics of like a person who is a scientist. And now he's kind of fulfilling the purpose by going more into that process of research and what that looks like and how it's chaotic and crazy and anything could happen. And they're trying to create order in that process. And we see lots of different metaphors and analogies here. Okay, compares them to pioneers on a frontier. I know he doesn't say the word pioneer yet, but that's kind of the implication of the metaphor there. And this crystals creating form, and then, oh my gosh, where's my and taking one off a cliff. Okay, we know he's not being literal with any of these things, so they're all sort of metaphorical. situations he's bringing up to really characterize that research process. Okay, in the wilderness, the scientist must create everything. It is grunt work, tedious work that begins with figuring out what tools one needs and then making them. A shovel can dig up dirt but cannot penetrate rock. Would a pick be best, or would dynamite be better, or would dynamite be too indiscriminately destructive? If the rock is impenetrable, if dynamite would destroy what one is looking for, is there another way of getting information about what the rock holds? There's a stream passing over the rock. Would analyzing the water after it passes over the rock reveal anything useful? How would one analyze it? All right, I can't even start with what he's saying before like talking about the rhetorical choices that I'm seeing here, because there were just so many of them. So there's a lot of questions going on here. And I know our first initial thought is we always say rhetorical question, but we always have to pause when we see a question and think, is it a rhetorical question or is it actually a question? Because rhetorical questions aren't questions. They're questions that are designed to prove points. I don't know that he's actually proving a point here. I just see that he's asking question after question after question when he's describing this process of scientific research. So we don't necessarily need to call them like rhetorical questions, but it's almost like questioning to show this, like the stream of consciousness of a scientist. Like, so he's kind of going through the questions that would happen internally in a scientist's mind as they're researching. And there's so many of them, right? So many questions, because that's what they're constantly having to do. Okay, so this kind of helps me better understand really what he's getting at in this paragraph, and what he's saying is scientists have to create everything in the process of research, and they do so through constant questioning. Question, question, question. Like, is this going to work? Is this going to work? Do I need to do this instead? Okay. And again, we continue this deep dive into the process of research. Oh, and now we're getting into, okay. I see this word ultimately, so I'm kind of seeing, okay, now we're getting into like effect or end of this process of research. So ultimately, if the research succeeds, a flood of colleagues will pave roads over the path laid, and those roads will be orderly and straight, taking an investigator in minutes to place the pioneer spent months or years looking for. And the perfect tool will be available for purchase, just as laboratory mice can now be ordered from supply houses. Okay, so kind of crazy, but I see like initially he's saying basically like if a researcher goes through all that work and questioning and difficulty, and they work so hard in this process of uncertainty, they now make it so much easier for the people who come after them, their colleagues. If they succeed, they've gone through this difficult, long process of uncertainty to make things easier for their colleagues in the future. So like almost it's giving us the sense like this was all worth it to make it easier for things to come. Okay, so why? Now he's getting into the results of scientific research and the value of it. So he's characterizing it, going through this whole process of uncertainty to lead to like something that's easier and something that we can grow from. Okay, how? Rhetorical choice. Well, he's continuing with the analogy of the pioneer on the frontier. And now he's continuing with this sort of like analogy or metaphor with paving roads. Okay, again, we're not talking about an actual frontier or roads. We're talking about these scientific discoveries that they're making. So these are really significant rhetorical choices. Okay, we can also see another rhetorical choice, sort of cause and effect. Because again, he's getting into the ultimately, this is what it's going to lead to. All right, and our last paragraph here. Not all scientific investigators can deal comfortably with uncertainty, and those who can may not be creative enough to understand and design the experiments that will illuminate a subject, to know both where and how to look. Others may lack the confidence to persist. Experiments do not simply work. Regardless of design and preparation, experiments, especially at the beginning, where one proceeds by intelligent guesswork, rarely yields the results desired. An investigator must make them work. The less known, the more one has to manipulate and even force experiments to yield an answer. Okay, so now he sort of goes to the flip side, right? Like people don't always succeed, and actually more often than not, they don't succeed. So the scientists are often sort of dealing with this like, okay, my experiment is failing. I'm trying to make something work. I'm not getting anything from it. Okay, so here he starts discussing the failure of research and experimentation. Scientists have to continue persevering through the uncertainty if they are ever going to yield results and discoveries. So I think it's really key what I'm noticing in the, remember what the author says is the most important thing to take away. So the big key thing I'm taking away here is, again, he's ending this passage with the same thing he started it with, this idea of uncertainty. So that's sort of the major characteristic that he's defining science with. So we want to make sure that's kind of like a forefront in terms of our overall purpose and understanding of the passage and the analysis that we do. So the scientists are never going to get to that sort of successful part unless they keep pushing through that uncertainty, keep questioning, keep trying to sort of, as he says, maybe manipulate, force experiments to yield results. Okay, they have to like push through that uncertainty. Oops, uncertainty. Okay, and if I think about rhetorical choice here, again, we have cause and effect going on because he's sort of talking about the other side, right? The first effect was if their experiments yield results and they're successful in their research, and here's sort of the other effect of that. Like if they're not yielding results, they have to continue to push and push and push. And he's sort of also talking about like, I think about his other rhetorical choices here, he's giving sort of logical or realistic sort of general situations, generic situations of scientists. So he's sort of like giving these general examples. It's not like a super specific example of what a particular scientist went through, but he's giving sort of this generic example that lots of scientists go through and can relate to. So if I really wanted to talk about this in my essay, I would talk about it as sort of a generic example that provides like understanding into the field, or sort of the flip side of the cause and effect he's been setting up here in the passage. Okay, so now in terms of my overall purpose and 3 to 5 rhetorical choices, this is going to help me really sum up everything and sort of shape my writing for today. Very purpose is to depict the field of science as being rooted in uncertainty and requiring immense courage. So one thing I want to highlight about what I just did there was I really just took what was absolutely given to me in the prompt, characterizing scientific research. And then I took what I read from the passage, focusing on this idea of uncertainty and courage, because he talked about that in his definition in the beginning, and then he returns to it in the end. So I just added those details to make my understanding of the text, my analysis, a lot more specific. In order to, okay, and here's where it gets a little tricky, because again, his audience is a lot more generic here than I feel like what we're used to in terms of rhetorical analysis. We usually have, well, they're trying to get the audience to rally together and spark some sort of change. Well, that's not really happening here because it's a quite different purpose. There's no social change here going on. Okay, but he wants to sort of almost like gain maybe like a respect or appreciation for the work that scientists do, especially if we think about the context here, you know, this being in the work of the book of the 1918 flu epidemic. Like, science is such an important profession. We need those people willing to embrace the uncertainty and to do all that sort of research so we can make advancements in these areas that really need scientific research. So in order to create, or let's say instill, I like it better, a sense of respect and appreciation from his readers. Okay. To do this effectively, he utilizes many rhetorical choices, such as definition, characterize the profession, analogies and metaphors, to enhance this understanding. In general, examples of what? Of the effects of scientific research. Okay, so those are my three main ones that I wanted to focus on because I noticed that I had cited them multiple times, this idea of defining, analogies and general examples, and I thought it kind of did a nice job of starting from the beginning, then going to the middle of the passage, and then going to the end. So that sets me up for a really nice essay of the full piece. Again, you're not actually going to write the full essay, but at least you want to know that you could. But there were lots of other rhetorical choices we discussed, so you could talk about any one of those. I could even add on more than three. Okay, so we did talk a lot about compare and contrast, so I could have done that. We talked about personification. We talked a lot about different appeals to authority, citing those authorities in the field of science, so I could have talked about those as well. I just tried to pick the ones that I felt like had the most meat to them, like I had the most quotes that I could use, and I could really dig into those a lot more. So that's kind of where I'm left off. So here, go ahead and just kind of check how yours corresponds to that. Again, your rhetorical choices don't need to be the same. Your purpose should be like pretty close to that. Yeah, and from there, now you can go ahead and sort of start this process of writing. So I just have to open up the document really quickly. So here, document again is going to look super familiar because you're doing the same process you've practiced a couple times already. That intro paragraph really ensures that you could write the full essay. but I'm not going to ask you to write essay after essay after essay. So just one body paragraph to practice that analysis, where you are analyzing one of the specific rhetorical choices that you identified in your thesis statement. So I do want to show off this sample from an awesome student in first hour who did a great job with Florence Kelly's assignment. So you can use this as sort of a guide for how you would shape your work on the analysis of Barry's text instead. Okay, so this student said, the early 20th century was a significant period for America's economy as industrial labor became widespread. Cities began to urbanize and mass-producing businesses rose in power. During this time, many reform groups, such as the National American Women's Suffrage Association, fought for the rights of working women and children whose work environments were typically strenuous and unsafe. In 1905, prolific social worker Florence Kelly gave this speech at a NASA conference, sorry saying that kind of short, NAWSA convention, where she describes the working conditions and regulations of child workers in order to urge the reformers to continue fighting to abolish child labor. Kelly successfully conveys this necessity by utilizing statistical examples, appeals to emotion, and unifying language. Okay, so this writer did an awesome job really focusing in. Look how much of that is rhetorical situation and really thinking about the context of the piece. Okay. Now, again, with the text that you read today, there's not as much context being specifically given there, other than the fact that it's part of a larger work of the 1918 flu epidemic. But I think even from there, that gives you a lot of opportunity to contextualize about why science is so important and sort of what might have sparked him to share that information and characterize what scientific research is all about, to help the general public sort of gain that appreciation and respect for the field. Okay, then this writer does a nice job of really summing up the purpose right here. Remember, that's the most critical part of your intro paragraph because it shapes your analysis throughout the whole essay. So make sure to refer back to what we came up with here in the document. Okay, and then you can even start your thesis the same way this student does, just insert different rhetorical choices. So Barry successfully conveys his message about science by utilizing, analogies, compare and contrast, definition, appeal to authority, whatever it is you want to talk about. Okay. And then I'm noticing that most students choose to write their first body paragraph. Okay, so you'll say something like begins the passage with or whatever, but you can feel free to write the middle paragraph or the end paragraph as well if you'd rather talk about the analogies because those are interesting. So, you might start with a transition after defining what science is, then Barry goes on to use analogies to help the reader better understand the process of scientific research. Okay, that's just an example there, but let's look at how the student did an awesome job analyzing. So Kelly begins her speech by citing many statistics about America's, quote, 2 million children under the age of 16 years who work in industry and how individual states' laws vary in their attempt or lack thereof to protect them. These factual examples provide a foundation for the audience's perspective on child labor and paint an accurate, dire picture of how youth have been integrated into labor. Even if they did not know much about the state of American child laborers or logical comparisons between regional laws, industries, demographics effectively convey that these laborers are being exploited and that they need to be protected. Kelly relies on the suffragists' predisposed affection toward children and desire to protect them in order for these statistics to open their attention to her message, rallying for urgency in this fight. So what this paragraph does so nicely, okay, again, we see the transition here signaling what part of the text we're looking at. We see the quote of a statistic, which is the rhetorical choice being analyzed. But the writer also alludes to that there are lots of statistics and doesn't spend too much time quoting all the different statistics because the quoting is not as important as the analyzing or the commentary. So this student does a nice job of focusing on that commentary of why the statistics are used, okay, providing that foundation for the audience's perspective, okay, of how dire the situation is. When we see all of those statistics, we see that dire picture of why action needs to be taken right now, okay? They go in depth here in terms of what the audience might know or not know, and how Kelly's choices allow them, regardless of how much they already know, to connect to what the children are going through. And they really do a nice job of discussing why this is so persuasive to this particular audience. They specifically identified the women's suffrage audience, because we know where this speech is being given. Okay, and it's particularly persuasive to them because they care about children, they desire to protect them, and so this is really getting them to want to create that urgency. Let's do this fight right now. Okay, so this is sort of what you want to mimic today when you're talking about Barry's passage. Can you pull out one of those really specific choices that he makes and do a deep dive into it? So if you want a challenge, I really recommend picking one of those analogies, because it's going to allow you, when you pick an analogy or a metaphor, it allows you to dig a lot deeper into your commentary of exactly what he's proving through that particular analogy, why he's doing it, how it's going to help enlighten the reader about the field of science. So yeah, go ahead and venture out into why he talks about scientists falling off the cliff or exploring the frontier and the roads being paved. Feel free if you want to explore any of those. Okay. Other than that, if you need any additional help, you know I have office hours from 1 to 2 every day, and I'm sure you guys are going to rock this. So have an excellent day, and I will see you Thursday. Bye.